Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me okay, and welcome to this webinar entitled A Deep Dive into Smart Modernization. My name is Eugene King and I'm a Senior Sales Engineer at LANSA based in the UK. Now there'll be time for a question and answer session at the end of the presentation and demonstration, and to ask a question you can use the webinar's Q&A facility. This can be found at the bottom of your window or the top, depending on what your layout is. When you click on the Q&A option, the Q&A window will appear. Just ask your question and press enter to send it to me. And then we'll answer those questions at the end of the session. So in this session, I will take you through the steps necessary to take an IBM application like this and leverage it into a modern web application working seamlessly alongside new functionality. Now to do this, we need to understand the role played by each of the three key parts to LANSA's modernization toolset. And the first of those is Axes. This is LANSA's refacing tool, and it can also be used as a standalone solution, and I'll show you an example of that during the demo. The second is Visual LANSA Frameworks. Now this is what it says on the box. It's a framework onto which the developer can build their application. And finally, there is RAMP, which allows you to plug in your Axes reface screens into this Visual LANSA's frameworks. Now let's take a look at each of these in turn before moving on to the demonstration. With Axes, we can take an IBM application and very quickly web enable it. This is done on the fly and requires very little effort. This is an example of what a screen looks like out of the box when Axes is initially installed. Now, nothing other has been done to this particular screen. However, using Axes' web-based development tool, you can take the screen further and add new functionality, such as charts, maps, and you can even merge a number of screens into a single display. And with most refacing tools, this would normally be as far as you could take your application. You can web enable your screen and make it look modern, add functionality around the peripherals, but you can't change the core behavior of the application or add core functionality. With Axes refacing your screens, it can be just the first step in that modernization journey. Now let's take a look at the other parts of the toolset. The Visual LANSA Framework is a key part of LANSA's low-code and IBM modernization development approach and is used to design, implement, and deploy web, Windows desktop, or mobile application. It allows developers to hit the ground running when developing back-office style applications, and we'll see this in action later in the demonstration. Now, throughout the demo, the term Visual LANSA is quite a mouthful, so I'm just going to be referring to it as the VLF. The final tool in the toolbox is RAMP. RAMP stands for a Rapid Application Modernization Process. It is a re-engineering tool that lets us rapidly consolidate your IBM application into the VLF, allowing you to run existing IBM applications alongside new development. You can then incrementally replace your RPG or COBOL programs with new components without serious impact to your business operations. Now let's have a look and see how that works. By first looking at a typical IBM application. Firstly, you will need to log in. Then navigate through a menu system to a desired option. Then perform some sort of search, normally through a subfile. Select a record from a subfile to display the details. And this is the target screen. This is the screen where you will maintain your data. The other screens are used to just navigate around the system. And these other screens we refer to in RAMP as junctions. The screen where you maintain your application data is called a destination. This is the screen we are interested in and which we will be plugging into the VLF. The RAMP tool will handle the navigation to the destination screen behind the scenes, and we'll see how we build that during the demonstration. As an end user, you will no longer see the junctions, only the destinations. And here's a typical example of what the screen would look like when it's plugged in to the VLF. The screen itself, it's still the green on black, but we've just used axes to reface it and ramp to plug it in to the VLF itself. But now, with thanks to axes and ramp itself, we've now got this modern application. So in the next part of the webinar, this is just going to be all hands-on, and I'm going to demonstrate initially a completed application which utilizes LANSA's modernization tools. And then I'll take you through the process of how we build a similar type of application. And during that process, I'll be showing you how to do the prototyping. I'll look at how we can use the various built-in wizards to generate new functionality quickly, and then how we can use the ramp tools to plug in those 5250 screens into the actual framework itself. So now I'm just going to jump across to my browser. Let me just open my browser up. Okay. So this is the VLF. So for the demonstration, I'm using a fictitious company called the LANSA Tool Company. And this is a company that sells tools online. And what you're going to be looking at is a back office style application that allows me to maintain that system. So first of all, it's going to ask me to sign in and add a password. So this is your first look at the frameworks. And the first thing I'm greeted with as a user is a dashboard. So this contains various KPIs. And this is an example of using a wizard to generate basic functionality and then plugging in my own data and own tables in the background to provide that data. So this is new functionality created using LANSA. If I go to the hamburger menu, so this little 3 bars at the top, we can see our menu that get pulled into the side. What I'm going to show you first is a couple of axes screens, just to show you what you're able to do with axes. I'm going to open up 2 sessions, session 2 and session 3. And each of these have got different looks. It's the same application that you saw some screenshots earlier, but now what we're using axes to web enable it. And all I've done now is plug that into the frameworks. And the reason being, one of the projects I worked on, they wanted to be able to provide users with just a standard 5250 style application using axes and not have to sign on. So it's used the credentials that I set up initially to bring up to log into the system and show the axes sessions. So these are the 5250 applications now that are web enabled. All the function keys are now at the bottom and they're clickable, as are the menu options. So this is the exact same system, but now one I've used the development tool to fully customize the screens and the menu systems, and the other I've left as essentially default. I've just applied a couple of global rules and styles for that and customize a couple of the screens. So if I go work with customers, again, I'm going to show you them side by side to show you how you can take it, how far you can take it, and then go on to customers. So these are the exact same screens. One I've just customized and the other I've left alone. To navigate to a particular option, I can just go into details, and that shows me the details there. Here, I have a prompt button. I can prompt the button and show the details. Now with this screen on the right, I've added additional controls, one of which is a data table. And that data table contains all the orders for this specific customer. And I can even download that to PDF, okay, or CSV, Excel, and I can copy that data from there. And that's part of the data table. And I've also added a chart to allow me to see the top 10. So this is an example of the sorts of customizations that you can do using axes. So on the left, out of the box, on the right, essentially a customized screen. What I wanted to show you is where ramp comes into it. So if I now go into sales order processing and go to customers, the first thing we're presented with is a way of doing our search. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of some criteria there. So LA, just do a search. And that's now gone off to the IBM I, searched the data tables, and brought back the results based on based on the search criteria. If I select, for example, LANSA mods, so remember the screens that we saw earlier, those session screens? Well, now what's happening is that it's the ramp tools that are now signing onto the system, navigating through the menu system to display the details. So this is the exact same screen that you saw in the sessions on the other side. So if I quickly go to the navigation, the quick navigation option here, and go session 2, we automatically jump back to where I was previously. And that's another advantage of the framework, is that it actually remembers where it was in that specific application area. So here it's remembered that we were showing the customer details on those 2 screens, and I can easily jump back and go to customers here and then show the customer details there, and it remembers exactly where I'm going. Okay, back to the ramp side. So as I now change and I want to view the address of the customers, of this specific customer, it's ramp in the background, which is handling navigation back to the subfile, selecting the option, and then coming back and showing the address. Same with the web information. Every time I do that, it's going back to the subfile and back again. But so what I've done here is I've essentially changed the way you navigate around the system. So I don't have to use the menu systems anymore. I can just use these tabs, and it makes it a little bit more intuitive. What I've also done is added some additional functionality, and I'll be doing this during the development side of this demonstration. I'll show you how we can add functionality like notes and being able to add attachments. So that with those, I can go and take the screens, the 5250 screens that I had, and I can take it a step further. So here we're using something called what we call a wrapper. So behind this, and in fact, as I'm running this as a developer, I have this option here where I can run various debugging capabilities. I've got various debugging capabilities, but it also allows me to show you the 5250 form, which is running the background, which is the one that we've previously seen. And I can then show the screen wrapper and it shows the details. Now, the advantage of using this wrapper is I could quite easily switch out from using the data that's on the 5250 screen to calling the data directly from the database, and the user would not be the wiser for that. Okay, so it gives me that option to do with that functionality. Okay, so I've shown you a completed application, but how do we go about building that application? So for that, I'm now going to open up the LANSA's integrated development environment. So here, this is, as a LANSA developer, this is where I'm going to spend most of my time. And if you do attend some of the other sessions, you would probably already seen this in action. We're not going to really see it as part of this demonstration because I'm going to be focusing more on the VLF. And to do that, I just go into the Tools, Visual LANSA Framework, and I'm going to work as a developer. So what this pulls up is the VLF Developers Workbench. So this is how I'm going to be working with that application framework. Now, as a developer, I've got access to multiple different frameworks, and as you can see, it's just an XML file. But you don't need to know XML. Everything is handled by the Developers Workbench. I'm just going to say, open that up for me. So this is an empty framework. So I've only added some bare bones to this, and I'll show you exactly what I've added. So if I go and select the top option here, this is framework-wide functionality. We'll see these common activities in action a little bit later. But for now, I just wanted to show you that this is a cloned framework. I'm creating an object repository tracking list. Think of that as a project list of all the objects that I'm going to be creating. So it allows me to group them together so I can easily find them within inside my repository. And I've also added the administration function. And this allows me to define users within inside the framework, and also to define what access those users have to each of the menu options which I'm going to be creating. And that's all I've created. So to get started, I need to prototype my application. And for that, I'm going to use the Instant Prototyping Assistant. So now what this does essentially it asks you a series of questions, and it slowly builds up a picture of what your application is going to look like. So the first thing you need to do is to define the objects or the business objects in your organization. So this is LANSA Tool Company. So we're going to have a customer or customers. We're going to have products, and we're going to have orders. Yeah, you could also have invoices, anything, any object which you can define and work with inside your organization. This is how you would actually define them. I'm going to change this color, make it burgundy, and then I go next. Now we want to define what actions to use with those business objects. If you remember the tabs that we went through for the completed application, this is what we're going to be creating. So for in this case, we can have details, we can have web information, we'll also have address, and we'll have order history. Okay, so once I've created those tabs, I can then assign them to each of the business objects that we've defined. So details on all of those, and then I'm just going to have web information, order history, and address on the customers. And then I go next. Now I need to define the application area that it's going to be sitting in. So think of the menu that I went through on the sample app. This is where we define those top level menu options. This is going to be a sales order processing. And then again, I can take each of those business objects and assign them to that application area, and then go next. It'll give me a summary of everything I'm going to be creating. I go finish, and it will now generate the XML in the background for my framework. Okay, so it's just generating it now. It closes it down and then reopens it up so we can see it. Now I could show you this application running, but before I do that, what I want to do is show you some of the prototyping features that we have built into this. So if I now go into my applications, we'll now notice we've got sales order processing, and in sales order processing, we've got our business objects of customer, products, and orders. I'm just going to go quickly to sales order processing, and I'm going to give it an image. So this is just the icon which will appear on the menu. So I'm just going to give it a quick sales. Let's just grab that one there. Okay, and then go on to customers. So select the customers, go into the images again, and select customers. Like that, and select. Okay. Now the other tab I'm going to go into here is the Rapid Application Development Pad. What this allows me to do is to create a working specification. So this, let me just clear that off. This becomes a working specification document. I can add notes. So the business analysts amongst you, I've sat down with customers, with the end users and super users, and I've sat down and used this to take notes and even to do mock-ups and do whiteboard mock-ups of the type of the functionality that they would like to include. And to allow us to do that, so I've got this image palette here with some images that I've got pre-created, and one of those is an example of a mock-up that we've done on a whiteboard of what the users would like to be able to do, search for, and the results of the search. So your customer ID, your customer name, download to Excel, quick search, and what details to be shown. I can go back onto the details tab and do the exact same thing. Clear the content. So this is the 50-50 screen to be converted. So I'm just going to grab one of these images that I've got here, drag and drop that on, and again I'm just going to resize that like that, and this is what it will look like. and then just go down, grab one of my other images and drop that on there as well, just like that. Okay, and just quickly do a resize. I'm done. Close that down. I'll do a quick save, and now I'm going to execute that application. So remember, I've not done any programming as such. Yeah, all this has been generated as a framework for the application. It's a prototype. So I'm going to sign on. So we started with an empty framework. We've got our sales order processing. We have our customers. I'm going to turn on automatic tiling. Okay, so I've got an option here to either turn automatic tiling on or off. If I turn it off, I can just drag that window around. And turn it on, it'll automatically handle it for me. We can see the prototyped filter with what we want to appear in the list. Because this is a prototype, I can search for customers. So this emulates the search. I can select a customer, and then that'll show the prototype details feature, you know, and the address, and you can see these other tabs here as well for the application. But it allows me to get that prototype up and running, and I can even share that URL, this at the top here, with other users, so I can get feedback on and their opinion on what they think of the application. Once I'm happy with that, then it's time to move on to the next phase, and that is to create some new functionality. So there's two things I need to do now. One is to create the search and the results list, and the other is to plug in the 5250 screen into the details tab. But let's start off creating some of that, the search facilities. So I'm going to go back to the workbench, and now I'm going to select the common activities. So this common activities, essentially think of it as tasks the developer has to go through to create an application. So it's the common things that they would do. And the first thing they would need to do is decide what is going to appear in the results list. So now I've got a little wizard which is asking me a couple of questions. So I know that the table that I'm going to be using is called LTC Cust. If I didn't know what it was, I would just select the search option here, and it would then give me a list of all the matching tables. I've got the one I want, so now I need to decide what's going to appear in the results list. So I'm going to have the customer name, ID, customer name. In fact, let's just change that to use the label. I'm going to have the name. I'm going to have the email address. I'm going to have the phone number. And we're going to have the, if I can find it, current balance. So that's all I'm going to have in my list. If I click the column heading, I get an additional prompt box. Now, one thing that's built into the framework is a responsive design. So I could run this framework on smaller devices, on phones, on tablets, as well as on desktops. So as a result, I need to say, well, if I'm running it on a phone, I don't want to see all of the items that are in that list, because I could have 30 different columns in that list, and I'd only want to see 3. So for this example, I don't want to see the ID. So let's get rid of the ID on a small screen, and we won't have the current balance on the small screen. And we'll do it like that. Okay, so that allows me to then decide what to display on what size device. One final step to do here, and that is, how do I uniquely identify a customer? For that, I use the key, which is the customer ID. And remember that, because I'll be using that later on when I plug in the ramp screen into the Visual LANSA framework. So this is the key that identifies the entry in the list. I'm going to go finish. That's now created that. Now, if you remember the mock-up, I wanted a contact card style. So I didn't want a straightforward list. So we have a different number of options on the styles that you can do, but I'm going to use this contact card style. For this demo, I'm not going to bother including an image or a photograph, and I'm going to simply do a create only. So we have an option to create and edit. So in this case, all it's doing is generating the code for the client, the code that sits on the server, and also the connections between the two to allow them to actually communicate. If I would have selected create and open up in the editor, it would have just opened up our IDE with the code. I could then make the appropriate changes to the code where I needed to add some customization. Okay, so that's the list sorted. Now I need to decide, how am I going to do the search? So again, we're fairly flexible on how you can do this search, but for this demo, I'm going to be doing an SQL search over a table. It already knows what the table is because I've defined it for the list. And now I need to decide how I want to do that search. So I'm going to have the customer ID and the customer name. If you remember going back to the mock-up that we created for the prototype. And then for the customer ID, I'm going to have begins with. And for the customer name, I'm going to have contains. I'm going to finish that. And now, again, we've got the same option, create only or create and open the editor. I'm just going to do a create only. And again, it goes off, creates all the front-end logic, creates all the server-side logic, and then plugs the two together. So that'll generate those for me. And then just two more things left to do in this part, and that is to add the attachments function and the notes function. Okay, so you'll notice down here, set up for commands or options, what we've tried to do here is the most common types of functionality we've given you a wizard for. So whether you're going to use a map, whether you want graphs or charts, or just simple create, read, update, and delete functionality. Yeah, we've given you those basic templates. So you can just generate the code and use it as is, or you can go in and you can edit those if you so wish. Okay, so that's now done. So I'm going to execute this now, just to show you what we've done so far. Once again, I'm going to sign in. Let's go into the sales order processing. And now when I select customer, I'm going to turn automatic tiling on again. You'll notice now that the prototype has been replaced by a real filter. So again, I'm going to just type in a partial description. And now we'll see that we've got LANSA mark, we've got the phone number, current balance, email information there. I can do a quick search in here. Now there we've got Tom. I can download this to Excel, which will give me my Excel spreadsheet. And I can change the order. What I can also do is determine how many of the business objects I want to open at once. So in this case, if I select 2, there's my first, and there's my second. So you can give the users the capability of opening multiple business objects, multiple instances of the customers that, from the results list. Okay, and again, that's built into the list itself. Right, so we've got that far. Oh, and we've added the attachments functionality. So if I need to, I can just use that to drag and drop a document and install it and upload it. So there you go, I've just dropped a document on there and uploaded it. I can add notes against this specific customer. Okay, so I can make a new note. And save that one. Okay, and now that's now saved against that specific customer. Okay, so we've got that far. We've added the basic new functionality. But what we're really interested in is how we can now plug in the 5250 screen into the details tab here. And to do that, we go back to our developers workbench, and in the tools we have another tool which is called the ramp tool. And this is, now it's first thing it does is asks me to sign on. So this is logging on to my IBMI. And when I select this, click to start a 5250 identification session, what it'll do is open an Axis session down at the bottom of the screen here. So we just wait for that to do that. So just a bit about the setup. So I'm based in the UK in St. Albans, and the box I'm running off is in Houston, Texas. So you can see the sort of performance, you know, sometimes it's a little bit slower than others. But here you go, this is our Axis session. I'm just going to collapse that part. We won't need that for this part of the actual demonstration. So the important thing here is that I turn on update navigation scripts. And what this will do is allow RAMP to record the keystrokes as I navigate through the system. So the first thing I need to do is to log on. You'll notice that the log on screen is blue because it's automatically identified as a junction. The program message, so remember I mentioned that there was the junctions and the destinations. Well, there's a third type of screen called a special. And these are screens which may or may not appear as part of the navigation through the system, like the program message. So we call those specials, and we handle them and RAMP handles them in a slightly different way, okay? So the first screen we get to here, which is red, is the menu. And remember I said that this is a junction. So at the top here, we've got the three types: junction, destination, and special. As we're not going to be doing any work on this screen, this is a junction. So I identify it as a junction. Then we just navigate through the system. Again, that's another junction. LANSA Tool Company. Another junction. Work with customers. And this is another junction. So in here, so I could just select from the subfile, but I've actually got a shortcut enabled on here, which allows me to enter the customer code and the option I want to view. So I want to view the details. Now, before I do that, let's just make sure that I identify this one as a junction. There we go. And let's just enter the information. Oops. And one. Okay. And then I press enter. And now this goes on to the customer detail screen. Again, this is, we're familiar with this. We've seen this in the actual past, in the past demos. Whoops. Went on to the wrong thing there. There we go. Okay. So now I need to identify that as a destination. That's now gone green. Now I need to complete the cycle. So press enter. Then press F12. F12, F12, and finally, I'm going to sign off the system. So what I've taught RAMP to do there is to sign onto the system, navigate through the various menus, go to the destination, and then sign off the system. Okay, but before I use that, I need to do a little bit of tweaking of the code which has been generated. Now the RAMP tool generates JavaScript. So here on the right that you see on the left here, you see a summary of all the screens that we've currently got defined. So with the work with customer screen here, I'm going to go onto the script. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see, so this is the script part that handles the various navigation. So this will say, right, are you navigating to and where are you navigating from? So in this case, we want to go to customer details from this screen. And to get there, we need to set the customer value to, if you remember, I typed in LANSA and the option to 1. Okay? But the problem here is that if I leave it as it is, it's always going to display the LANSA customer details. I don't want that. So what I need to do is to go to the current instance list entry and get the first key. Remember I used the customer ID and set that up in the instance list? That's what I'm doing there. Okay, so now it's a variable and it'll be dependent on what I select from that list itself. The next thing I need to do is to tell the framework or to tell the ramp what part of the framework to plug this into. So for this, it's going to be the customer details. So here you see my business objects. There's my customer and my customer details. I just click it here, and that says, right, you are now attached to the details tab. Because ramp is now handling all the navigation around the system, I no longer need these function keys. So I'm going to let ramp deal with all of that navigation and the VLF. So I'm just going to turn those off. And we're done. So I'm now going to save that. Okay, almost done here. One thing left to do is to execute the application. And we can log in once the login script appears. Okay. Let's get the right password and sign in. Okay, from the menu option, select Sales Order Processing, select Customers. I'll turn on automatic tiling again, do a quick search, and select LANSA. And if everything's worked, we should see the 5250 screen appear, pop up. Okay, so navigating through the system and displays there. So we can see there that we've now plugged in that 5250 screen into our frameworks. And I can just navigate around the system, just doing the same thing just by selecting the actual tabs there. Okay, so that finishes the demo. Let me just jump back to the presentation. So just to really summarize what you've seen there, and I know it's a fairly quick demonstration, and we can always contact your local sales rep. We can have a more in-depth discussion on the modernization tool set. But really, just to summarize, what I've shown you is how we can take your IBM I application and quickly web enabling it using Axes. With a little work, we can change the look of the application and enhance the functionality. And you could stop there. Yeah, you don't have to go any further. But with the aid of LANSA's VLF, you can take those Axes screens and embed them into a modern web application. And in this way, you can leverage those existing 5250 applications. You can further enhance those screens using wrappers, as I showed you, or even replace them completely with new functionality created with Visual LANSA. So that concludes the presentation and demonstration portion of this webinar. So at this point, I'll open it up to questions. So let's have a look on the questions. Okay, so I notice we've got one already answered. Are we looking at version 15? Yes, we are. So that's for the audience. Okay, we have another couple of questions. So what training is required? So there are actually two parts to that question. And the first is the training requirements for Axes. Now, there is no official training course for this, but once you've installed it on the IBM I, you'll be able to run through the tutorials. And this can take between 1 or 2 days. And in this time, you'll have all the skills required to modernize your screens. Now, the second part of the training requirements are for RAMP. And this can be probably between 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the requirements of your first project. And this course includes everything that you need to be able to create the VLF application. So that's the Visual LANSA fundamentals, the VLF itself, and the RAMP technologies. Okay, so another question, what version of the operating systems are supported? So for Axes, it's 7.1 and above. For Visual LANSA, that includes the VLF and the ramp technology, we're looking at 7.2 and above. Okay, so that's all the questions. Oh, no, we've got one that's just popped up. Is ramp a different product than LANSA for the IBM-I? Yes. So LANSA for the IBM-I is essentially the LANSA development tool that runs on the IBM-I. So that's your functions and your processes, whereas ramp essentially enables those 5250 screens to be plugged into the web application. Reminder that the next session, adding APIs to existing apps, will begin shortly. And in this session, the session will demonstrate how easy it is to add APIs to existing Visual LANSA applications. So if there's no more questions, thank you for attending today's webinar. You may now all disconnect.